For many years, I've been inspired by the Puritans, Jeremiah Burroughs being one of them, John Flavel being another, in terms of how to approach life as a Christian with suffering all around us. Now, of course, there's different levels of suffering, of course, in his life, but all suffering is ordained by God's hand. So one thing that John Flavel in his Mystery of Providence taught years ago, that God uses suffering for his own purposes. God is not surprised by it, and God is not going to waste our suffering as Christians. I want our students to be well-versed in the fact that God is not going to waste their suffering. God is going to use the suffering of his people throughout church history, and he's going to redeem it, and he's going to use it in ways that we will not fully understand on this life. But we know that he is working out his good to those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. All things will work together for good. And history, especially the history of the church and the history of Christian evangelical people throughout God's story, that God will bring his people safely through. He will give them joy. He will give them satisfaction. And I can speak that from personal experience in a classroom in ways that I could not have done 2 years before. I find myself in the classroom often as we talk about human suffering through a war or an event, or the other day we were speaking about the lives of particular Christians in history who suffered martyrdom. And I'm able to now open up and to be able to show students in a practical way what that might look like in the 21st century. What does suffering look like? It might not be martyrdom today, but it might be a neurological disease of one of your children. And as God was good to the martyrs of the past, God will be good to you and sustain you in the diseases and cancers and disappointments and the no's of life. God is using suffering to increase your joy. God has used suffering in my life to increase my joy. And that is supernatural. That you can't define that or describe it on mere human language. There's a biblical sweetness to suffering and to experiencing suffering in ways that are indescribably painful in one sense, but also indescribably joyful and happy and satisfying. Satisfying not oneself, but satisfying that God is there. And sharing this with students, that God is sufficient for me in these circumstances, and the same God is sufficient for me is sufficient for you. I love 2 Corinthians 1, where we see that God is the God of all comfort, and he's the Father of mercies. And those phrases are earth-shattering and mind-boggling, that in these sufferings, he is the God of all comfort and the Father of mercies. And I want my students to experience that as they hear history and as they hear it applied and personalized through their professor. That I'm not just merely speaking these things anymore, but I am experiencing in one sense. Now, my level of suffering pain is I don't want to compare it in degrees to other amounts of suffering, which for sure could be more than what I'm experiencing, but nevertheless, it's a real, tangible suffering that is happening, and our students may experience similar suffering in the future. And I want them to know through their readings and through my sufferings that their God is also the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort.